Right, let's do this fur first of all, I think, and get this collar and her cuff done. So what we're going to do for this is use 182, which is in your class. And it's a paler blue than 178. So I'm going to use it just to create the look of white fur. And I'm going to use my blender first, okay? So I've got a little bit of blending solution in here. And I'm just going to go around the edges, okay? So you'll see the paper go slightly darker, like almost like a grey. That's just because it's putting a liquid down, but there's absolutely no colour to the blender, as we know, because it doesn't blend, it bleaches. So we're almost in effect lightening that blue even more by putting the blender down first. And then I'm just literally going to go in and do little teeny tiny flicks. You're hardly going to even notice it, but it just takes away the starkness of that white, okay? So I am literally just going in and I'm just doing this. Just little flicks going into the line of that fur, okay? So it looks like you've got that feathered edge. Okay, and then a little bit where the designer has put the pen lines or the stamp lines, just in there like that, okay? And then we're going to leave that to evaporate, and we're going to see if we need to come back and go back over with the blender. I'm going to do the same on the cuff. So we're going to go around the edges here. Up against her arm there. And again, you're not pressing down particularly hard. You can put more pressure on than you do when you're using your colours, but it's just to get that solution down. And then again, just smallest amounts, little flicks here and there. Take them in different directions. Just make sure that you go right up to, when here, you go right up to the edge. And then just go around like this. And the quicker you do this, actually, the better it is, because you're not thinking about it. You're not doing this, putting a little bit of blue down there and being precise. None of that. We're just going to get that colour down, okay? And I can already see from here to here how that is much, much, much lighter, which is good. And then we're going to go over here like this. And we're going to just go in and add that blue around there, underneath her arm, and a little bit on that detail line. And for me, that's enough. It's very difficult to see on camera because it's so light, but when you do this in the comfort of your own home, you'll see exactly what we mean by it. It looks lovely, it looks really soft, it looks like an icy white, which is just beautiful. Right, so I think we will attack the jacket next, and we will do it with our purples. So our 75 as our lightest, our 82 as our mid, and our 81 as our darkest. And we're going to do this in a slightly different way because we're going to add texture onto the jacket with the pens. So the first thing I'm going to do it a section at a time, just like we did her hair. So we're going to do this part of the sleeve first, then we'll do this part, and then we'll come down and do here, all right? So this is a really nice technique, and it's much, much easier than doing the hair. So we'll balance kind of the level of the class out with the different components that make up this image. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to lay down my palest colour all over, all right? So I'm going to just take my time, and I'm going to go in. I'm going to go round the edge first. And this is the joy of having pens that don't get darker when you go over them, because you can just go over the edge, fill in, put your lines in so that you're working within a boundary, if you like. This is the way that I like to do it anyway. And then in to the fur, okay, because you've got the furs coming over the top of the jacket. Okay, down here, go around this fur, just take your time And where if there's a little gap in the actual drawn line, just use your judgment and decide which would be fur and which would be her jacket. It's quite obvious where they are. There's very few areas where the lines aren't joined, but there might be one or two where you just need to be aware of it. Okay, and then I'm going to go in, I'm going to fill the whole thing in with circles. And I'm not worried about getting a smooth finish, so I'm working a little bit faster than normal. And the reason for that is because we're going to add texture. So it really doesn't matter at this moment in time. You don't really want white areas. You want to cover the whole thing, but you can see I'm working a little bit faster than I normally would. And I'm not doing this. I'm putting my nib down. I'm not taking my nib off, and I am literally just using my hand to create those circles with that pen, okay? It's a lovely colour, this. And just going over, and you will look, when you're doing things like this, you'll look and you'll think, well, I've got darker, that looks darker, it looks like there's a darker line there. It's just because it's needing to evaporate, that's all. Right, so once we've got that down, we're going to go in with our darkest colour next, which is 81. So again, slightly different to what we normally do, but we're going to put the dark in. So I'm going to go right under where that fur is. Now this time I'm taking my time and I'm going in and making sure that I get all the little teeny tiny areas so that the fur looks like it's a fur collar coming over the top of the jacket, which is exactly what it should look like, okay? Down here, I'm going to put some creases of darker in there. And it's one of those, when you're colouring this, it will look like a bit of a mess when you first start, but it gets better the more you work it, okay? So I just want you to be aware of that, because if I don't tell you that and you get halfway through and think, this doesn't look right, you won't know that that's how it's supposed to look. So that, again, just takes that pressure off a little bit. And this will be absolutely different every time you do it, because the ink will move differently every time you lay it down. It's quite good fun though. Okay, so I've gone over there like that, and then I'm going to bring some of this colour down here. Okay, we're just going to almost... Now this is going against everything that I've already taught you. So you're just going to go in and you're going to leave some lighter areas and you're going to add some darker areas in like that, okay? I know it looks a mess. Then we're going to go in with our 82, and this is almost like a magenta. And if you saw then what I had to really quite twist that lid off. The reason for that is because I've got alcohol ink in my lid. All right, and you will get that because this creates such a tight suction because it needs to stop the ink from evaporating. You will get that. So what I would suggest you do is put some of your blending solution. So use your isopropyl alcohol, don't use your refill. Put some of that on a microfiber cloth. Wrap the microfiber cloth around a fine liner and clean inside your lid, because I've got it here too. And when alcohol ink dries on plastic, it's almost tacky. So you've got a tacky ink there and a tacky ink there. That's why your lids are struggling to come off. So every now and again, just give them a clean and they will come back to the way they were when you first got them. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to go over and we're going to dot, and we're pushing that ink into that cardstock. And it's going to give you almost like a motley effect, which you get when you look at velvet, especially something like crushed velvet. You get that look of some areas are much lighter, some are much darker, but it's almost like the material's been over-dyed and you've got this excess of colour, all right? And we're going to do that, and then we're going to let that sit, because what we're going to do is by pushing that colour through, we're going to absolutely saturate this card. Because once you've saturated from top to bottom, the ink can't go anywhere, so it sits on the surface because it can't be absorbed anymore, so it sits on the top. That's how we're going to get the look of that velvet. We're going to do it in sections, and then we're going to come back and put even more ink over here, okay? So you're not going to get that, you're going to get a slight motley effect, but you're not going to get the true look of it until we finished it all. So let's go back in now and do this area. So this I'm going to do in pink to match the braids. So I'm going to bring the pink from here and here down and create that colour triangle. So we get that nice, that really nice finished composition, if you like, that's balanced. And then I'm just going to go in, I'm going to just do this bit of a sleeve here. And then we'll come on to the main area of her jacket. So this is actually really quite quick to do. So after the simplicity of that, oh, not the simplicity, the complexity of the hair, this is quite nice then to do this. So if you're watching this first and then colouring in after, you might want to do a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this, a bit of that. Personally, I would do all that, but I would just stop at certain times and just have a bit of a break, because I don't want you to be overwhelmed by it, but it's entirely up to you. It's how you choose to work. And then again, I'm going to go in with my darkest colour. I'm going to make sure that I'm nice and gentle going into the areas where the fur are. I'm going to pull down. And I'm going to add my darker areas in, okay? And then I'm going to do my scribbly bit where I leave some bits lighter, some bits darker. And it doesn't really matter which bits are which, okay? And then in with 82, which is more of our magenta, and we're going to dot, we're going to push. And we're going to do this a lot in the next class with the baby dragons. So we lay down a colour and then we remove it by adding the dots in with another colour. So this is a good trial, if you like, for that. Right, I'm going to do this bit next. So I'm going to go in to this fur here. We're going to go under the arm like that. Round this lovely piece of fabric that's coming down here. Now this bit here, I'm going to just fill in this area. Okay, round that tassel there. And I'm just going to do down to here first. All right, we'll come back to this part after. And we're going to go around and we're going to fill it in. And there's no stamp line at the bottom of this, so we're just going to take that colour and we're going to leave it a little bit raggedy at the bottom. Rather than drawing a straight line across, we're just going to use our pens to add a little bit of texture into there. Then 81, so our darkest one again. This time we're going to focus right underneath here with our darker colour. We're going to bring that down quite a long way because her arm is going to cast that shadow. The fur is going to continue to cast the shadow around there, and the tassel is going to cast a finer shadow around here, okay? And then we can go in and do our random wibbly wobbly lines. We haven't done wibbly wobbly lines for a while, have we? It's quite nice. There we go. And then we'll go back in with our H2 and we will push that colour in. So we're adding that colour into here and pushing it through. We're starting to saturate that cardstock. So eventually what will happen is the colour will then sit on the surface because it has nowhere else to go. So we're never going to work right to the edges because we don't want it to bleed out, but we're going to absolutely saturate that cardstock. It is quite good fun. It's quite a stress reliever, this one. And then we're going to continue this round. So round here. As you get into the finer areas, slow down. Think about the pressure that you're putting on. It's that stopping and starting. It's like learning clutch control when you first learn to drive. It's learning where that biting point is, where you need to slow down, then you don't stall your car. So just slow down as you come to the edge because we don't want to get too much ink there, and then just continue your line, and then we're going to fill in. And you might find that when you're working a little bit faster, you get that roll on the end of your pen a little bit more because you're putting a little bit more pressure. Remember, please don't cut it, just pull it off. It's just because we're working with rubber, and I want you to think about a piece of blue tack and rolling it in between your fingers, or rolling it continuously like we're doing with this pen. You will get a little stringy bit at the end. It's just the way it is. And it's just well, it's not even a payoff for having a polymer rubber nib, because it's not an issue. But we're just going in now and just adding that colour and laying it down. And again, I'm not worrying about getting it absolutely seamless. As long as there's no white bits, we're good to go. So then in with our darker areas. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and I'm just going to go right inside here first, because this is the trickiest areas. Just get that dark colour down. Again, remembering that pressure, taking the pressure right off while we go around the edges. And it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of purple on one of your tassels, because we're going to go over that with our pinks anyway. So we're all right with that too. But these purples are just beautiful. This is a proper chocolate wrapper purple, isn't it? It's just lovely. It's very regal. And then we're just going to go in and put in our scribbly bits. This is really quite liberating actually, because normally we're so focused on it, aren't we? And this time we're just like, just scribble. How cool is that? And that's something you could do with the chisel end as well if you wanted to, if you really want to saturate it quickly. And then we're going to go in and we're going to dab. And where the lighter colour is, you'll get more of the pink, and where the darker colour is, it will take away some of the darker colour. So you will get those different tints, tones and shades of the purples coming through. And we're really just pressing that colour in. As you get towards the tassels and the delicate areas, just take that pressure off. And then start to dab that. Right, now if we turn this over, you'll be able to see it's really saturated. It's not completely saturated, so we're going to go in and do another layer of our dotting, and we're going to add in some of the darker and the lighter colours this time, but it's much more saturated than the hair is, okay? And that's, so what we're doing now is, because you've got such a gentle flow on the ink, what we're doing now is by pressing harder on the actual nib, we're forcing the ink to come out. So if I show you just down here, if I just dab normally like this, the ink will come out. If I do that, it almost puddles and then soaks through. That's the kind of thing we want. So I'm going to go in with my 81, which is my darkest one first, and I'm going to start to press this in. Okay, and I'm really going to push that ink into that card. I'm not going right to the edges because the ink's going to spread. So just be aware of that, because it's going to have to go somewhere. But I'm starting to add that in. I'm going to do the same here. And you can see the difference from when I'm doing this, I'm really, really, really fine, to when I'm really pressing down. I've got another little thing on there. Just need to get that off. There we go. And then I'm just going to push this in, okay? So I'm pressing that colour in. And it's a really nice technique. It's not easy to see when you're looking at it on a camera, but when you're doing it at home, you'll absolutely be able to see what's happening. And I'm just going to go in, and there's no rhyme or reason, there's no method to it. As I come up here, I'm going to add a little bit more, but much gentler. So it's still putting that colour out. And because we haven't used these colours before, I don't think, have we used them? I think we used them in the fuchsia actually once. They're still really juicy. So you're getting that nice amount of ink, but it's still controlled by the barrel of that, by the nib of that pen, which is good. It's not just bleeding out. And that's why a brush nib for this, a polymer rubber nib for this is better than a bullet nib, because with a bullet nib, you can't squash it. So it's much nicer to have this. and be able to do all these different techniques. Now I'm going back in with H2, which is more of the magenta. So this is going to move some of that ink, or it's going to move some of the colour, but it's adding in more ink. So we're saturating even more now. I'm staying away from the tassels and I'm just concentrating on the larger areas around here. And we're just pushing that colour into that cardstock. And if I turn that over, look how saturated it's getting now. Okay, and eventually it won't take any more ink, and then it will sit on the surface. And it almost looks a little bit shiny. Takes quite a while to get there, but you will get there eventually. Just keep dabbing that colour on, okay? And then I'll put a little bit of light in, just so it doesn't look completely blocky. You can see it's taking longer, look, for the ink to soak through the paper. You see there, where I've been over it again, watch. You see it's taking longer than when I do it there. And you want to get to that stage where it's taking longer for that ink to soak in, because then you know that it's really saturated and it's struggling to find a place to go. So there, look, taking longer. Still a bit quicker there, so we're going to go back in, add some more. 81. I'm going back in and I'm going to start putting the darker areas back in. And you can see now it's really taking a while to sink through. Watch. You see? It's clever that, isn't it? And when I do it here, it's still quicker because I haven't gone over here again with the darker yet. So it's a really good way of judging whether you've got enough ink down. I'm not going anywhere near the edges. I'm just leaving those as they are. And I'm just getting that concentration of ink down. Look, can you see now? It's really, really struggling to find a place. And that's what we want, because eventually that will just dry on the surface and you'll get that really mottly look that took ages to go through, which is exactly what we want. I do love doing this bit, because it's just throwing the rules out the window, isn't it? All the things that we've taught you about the flow of the pen and all of that kind of thing, but this was all planned in. So before we started to actually film the lessons, when we were planning everything, all these kind of techniques were planned in. And now they're all coming to fruition, which is lovely. So watch, I'm just going to go in very gently now with the darker colour just around those tassels, just to make sure that I've not got lighter areas where they should be darker. So into that fur again. And it's almost that driving your car again, going at the speed limit and then slowing down, and then going at the speed limit and then slowing down. It's that faster and slower process. And it's knowing, when I say put the brakes on, it means taking the pressure off the nib. It's that kind of thing. Right, I think we can do one more layer. And then we should get to that saturation point. Yeah, look how long it's taking that to go through now. Brilliant. And then we're going to let it dry. And it will take a while to evaporate. So don't, just be patient with it. That there, and then one more layer with the lighter colour just to add some highlights in there as well. And you're not going to get blobs of the lighter colour because it's going to take so long to move that colour underneath. It's not going to happen. So you're just now adding in, and it will start to look almost black or a very, very, very dark grey. Not the colour, but the almost like the shadow, the cast of the ink. So when I'm looking at it here, I can see it almost looks like a really dark browny grey. That's because we're adding lots and lots and lots of the purples on top of it. So I'm going to leave that now and I'm going to let that evaporate. But look, can you see how it's really started to come through? If you did that with an inferior quality pen, that would be absolutely saturated as well. So we're using the right cardstock with the right pen. So we're using our Super Smooth 250, 300, 350. So it's still containing that ink. It's actually really remarkable that that hasn't just bled out everywhere. That's the quality of that nib and the flow of that ink that nib controls. But you can see we've got a lot of ink on there. And I'm going to let that just dry completely and then we'll have a look at it again. So while it's doing that, let's go in and do our lovely, almost like a shawl that she's got on here with these tassels coming over. So we're going to do this with our pinks again. So 28 as our lightest one. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to add this colour. On my original one, I added in almost like a red with this as well when I did the braid. So the one on the picture is much darker. It's up to you. I just thought I would show you a lighter version. Now I've got a little bit of purple bleeding in there, which I would expect with the amount of ink that we've put down, but we can just get rid of it. Look, just by dabbing, it removes that purple. It's so clever how an alcohol pen works, but if you've never been taught how it works, you never know, you don't know. And it's very much like knowing how different cardstocks are made. So the difference between pro paper and a regular copier paper, it's down to the length of the fibres, which is why, because pro paper has such tiny, tiny fibres, it holds the ink in place. If you don't know that, you don't understand how the product works and why it works, then you don't get the best out of it. So doing a course like this has just been fabulous, because now not only do you know that you can colour with alcohol pens, but you know how they work and therefore why we use the different techniques. And that's really what we wanted to bring you when we talked about bringing this course in the first place. Because otherwise it would have been, you know, just another set of pens, a brilliant set of pens, but you wouldn't have known that if we hadn't taught you how to use them properly. So thoroughly enjoyed doing this. And it's not finished yet, which is good. I think I'm going to be a bit sad when it is. We might have to find something else to do. Because it is lovely. And it's nice actually for me as well, just to be able to stop and colour for a few hours with you, which is just joyful. Right, so I'm now going in with my darker colour and I'm making sure I go right underneath that fur line, right into the base of those little tassels that are hanging down. I'm just adding that dark into there. And then we're going to go back in and blend through with our mid, so where those two colours meet, we're just going to pull that colour down to soften it, and they are quite close to each other, so they will naturally want to start to blend. And then remember what we did with the light one last time, where we took a little bit of our colour of our 198 and we put it onto our number 28, and we used that to create that mid shade that then softens those colours in. Because we haven't got every colour next to each other, we have to find new ways of making it blend. And when we find new ways, we found new techniques and we learn more. So it's easy to colour when you've got all the colours that you need right next to each other. But when you have to think a little bit more outside the box, then, you know, you learn more. And I love that. And it actually makes you a better colourist, because you've got all these techniques up your sleeve that you can call on as and when you need them. Right, I'm going to let that just evaporate. I might go in and I might actually just add now, while that's still really quite wet, a little bit more of that mid colour, just to make that a little bit less prominent, and then a little bit of that darker just back in. And again, because it's still wet, you're not changing the colour that you're using. If you want to go half a shade darker rather, you can do that as well, but you'll do that once it's dry, and then just go in. Because this is a very light colour, as soon as I put this colour down, it's moving that colour underneath. So just be gentle with your palest colour when you're going back in. Otherwise you'll just keep putting it in and taking it away, putting it in and taking it away. Right, so I've got purple here that's bled out, and it's bled out from that sleeve bit, but I can just literally dot on top of that and it disappears. And just take your time colouring in your shawl here. So I'm just going around the edge, laying down that colour and then filling in. There we go. Right. Mid colour. So again, I'm going to go into that fur there first. And then I'm going to turn her around and I'm going to use my flick technique to get that colour down. And then into that little area there. And into there. Those bits in, and then turn around again and do from the bottom because I find it much easier. There we go. And then our darkest colour. So again, I'm going to turn it round and flick up because I find that easier. You do what you find easier. We're going down, but not quite as far as we did with the mid colour. So we're keeping a distance between the mid and the dark. And turn around, do the same here. Bringing that a little bit further up, a little bit further down, like that. And then back in with our 198 mid colour and just where those colours meet. And you can see it. You're going to work up and down like this. Soften that through. And then we're going to pick up our colour from our nib again. And then we're going to go from the middle out like this. Just soften that colour. Be very light with this, with your palest colour, because it will move that colour quite quickly. And just keep picking up more colour off that mid colour nib. And then I'm just going to go back in and just add a little bit more where I've already been. Now that's dried off a little bit. Tiniest amount. It feels really weird because I can see the colour going down, but I actually cannot feel it. There, like that. Might just do a bit going up there. Gets to a stage where I'm like, right, Melanie, step away from the pens. And then just scribble it out. It takes it back to its original colour. There we go. Oh, missed one. Can't have that. There we go. Right, so let's bring the blue down now and give her little blue beads. So it brings the blue from her hair down into here, and I'm not even going to worry about doing two colours. I'm just going to press that blue in there. So we've then got the blue on her actual shawl itself, on those little This gives you a good excuse to get rid of any colour that's gone into those little circles. Just dab and it will push that colour through. Okay. Like that. Right, just need to have a look at that jacket. I'm just going to try something. Don't know if it'll work or not, but we can try it. I'm just going to go in with my blender a little bit and just add little bits of blender here and there. It might not work, it might look a little bit patchy, but if you don't try, you'll never know, will you? So don't you do this, let me do it first. Let's see if it's a disaster, because I would hate to think that I've got you to do all this and then, no, it looks quite nice actually. It's going to start doing its thing and it's going to just add a few highlights and lowlights. So quick, don't have too much blender in your pen if you're at the stage where you're refilling them. Okay, I'm going to let that just do its thing. You can see it's picked up some colour because it's now in my blender, but you can just colour that out, look. Quite like that actually. Right, I'm going to let that do its thing. So to do these snowflakes up here, I'm going to use 182. I'm not going to do all the pointillism for you because it's just lots of dots. I'll do a little bit of it, but depending on whether you like doing it or not, it's entirely up to you. All right, I'm going to turn this around so I can actually work away. I don't want to get my hand in that because it will still be wet. And all I'm doing is just going in and just putting a tiny amount of blue just across these snowflakes. And I'm just literally doing a star like that. You know, like I used to do at school. Just those lines, just a little bit. I'm not even worrying about getting them perfect. Just takes away the starkness and adds that little bit of iciness into there. And then just do some of the, like she's blowing the frost. I do love this image. I could write a whole book about this image. I could have a whole story going on in my head. And then we'll do this one down here. So again, I'm just going to be really, really, really careful. Just get in there. That's super, super, super fine. So don't worry about a little bit going over the edges, because it will. There's no way around it. But then I'm just going to go and come out of the lines purposely. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go in and do these little bits here. And then I'm just going to do a tiny amount of pointillism just to show you. So it's just going to come from her mouth. We're just going to do dots like this. We're just going to fill in some of the gaps in between here. So it looks like she's blowing it, like her breath is icy cold. And as she blows on a cold winter's morning, her breath freezes and snowflakes appear. The magic begins. Told you I could have a whole story going on. And I'm making it so that it comes quite straight up, quite like that. And then I'm going to just continue this in lines coming out like this. Well, not straight lines, but going off towards the left. So it looks like it's blowing further and further out. And it is literally just little dots. Look at that. Love it. And take some of them and then just fade it out as you get further across the page like this. So fewer and fewer and fewer dots as you go out. She's just catching the breeze. The breeze is turning her breath into those snowflakes. I'm just going to put one or two up here because they would disperse out here. Like that. And then underhand, just coming down like this. Okay. Like that. And that is your Snow Queen finished. And when you're at home, you'll be able to see that it creates this like motley effect. That blender actually worked really, really well. So I would go in and just very lightly, and then you can always go back in and go in with your palest colour and add a little bit more over the top if you want, which will then react with that blender as well. But I actually think I'm really quite happy with her as she is. Okay, so we'll get the next set of pens out and we'll do the princess.